So I don't know how I'll get through the thing.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be okay. Okay, don't worry, nobody can see in the recording. Okay, it's just me. All right, well, let's go. Admit. Oh, one more is coming on. Okay, let me move this over here. Oops, moving that to the wrong place. Okay, let's zoom in. Let's see what we're doing. So to give background to what we have been doing, or to what we studied last week, we gave a nice introduction to the Tanya itself. One thing I want to mention is that I really want to make all of these classes both a continuation and self-contained. That means if you do miss a class, it should still be self-contained enough. And honestly, since there's a week between each class, you need a little catch-up anyways, what we were talking about. So they will all be, God willing, self-contained. However, you should try and attempt to get to each one to get a full picture. We also mentioned that, oh, we have somebody in person. I didn't expect it. 1 second. Yeah. I didn't know you'd be coming in person. Okay. Did you get
Last time it was 1,250 miles from here.
Did you order the Tanya?
I did. It's floating around on the UPS
Okay.
truck.
I'll pull a table for you next week.
It's supposed to be here by.
I would have sat on my dining room table. Okay, it's okay. All right. Well, you'll have to follow along on the screen over here with the rest of us. Good people. Huh? Are you eating a lot because it's Hanukkah or something?
No, she was just handing out the latkes.
Oh, okay, okay. You see, if you come in person in the kitchen, if you come in person, you get latkes. Okay. So the story is that we started off the Tanya. We said before we can get into how to live a life of meaning and purpose, we have to first understand ourselves, and that's what the beginning chapters all discuss. The beginning chapters all discuss how to understand ourselves. We started off last week with trying to define what is it that we're trying to be. And so in order to get to that, we need to discuss what is righteous and what is wicked. Well, we came up that what we generally think of righteous, what do people imagine as righteous? People imagine as, well, let's start there. What do you imagine as a righteous person? Anybody? What's righteous or a tzaddik?
Doesn't have an animal soul.
Doesn't have an animal. Okay, you learn Tanya.
Well,
When you call somebody righteous, like I said, every Jewish mother thinks their kid is a tzaddik, thinks their kid is righteous. And the flip side, we said that nobody wants to consider themselves a wicked person. However, we had a problem because there's a Mishnah that said something really strange. It said that, let me just admit this next person. Okay, we said that when you're born, they make you swear that you will be a righteous person and not a wicked. All right, so you got to be righteous. But then it says, and even if everybody tells you you're righteous, you should consider yourself wicked. So the whole thing doesn't make sense. And then we got into the discussion of what does it even mean to consider yourself wicked? If you look at yourself as wicked, you're not going to be able to live your life fully because you're going to be very depressed. And if you're not depressed by the fact that you're wicked, then you're never going to push yourself to be a better person. So again, the point of all this is, how do we view ourselves? And that's a question each one of us has to ask ourselves. How do we view ourselves as righteous? And when we think about it, honestly, when I think about it to myself, like, I don't ever want to look at myself as wicked, but I also can't, in all honesty, view myself as righteous, right? So what are we stuck at? How do we typically view ourselves? If we
a little of this and a little of that.
A little of this and a little of that, exactly. A little of this and a little of that, exactly. We're all stuck recognizing we're not righteous, unless you're very arrogant. We're all stuck recognizing we're not righteous. We also don't want to feel wicked. And if somebody does feel wicked, that's a bad story. Those are usually the bad people in this world. They define themselves as evil and wicked. So we're a little of this and a little of that. And that's really who the Tanya is coming to address. It's coming to address us, the people who are a little bit of this and a little bit of that. That's why, in fact, it's called the Sefer Shel Beinanim, or as he writes on the front cover, it's the book of in-betweeners. So if there's such a concept as an in-between, we're going to define what exactly is that in-between level. So let us get to now, there's a strange Talmud, which if your head was exploding before, what's a tzaddik, what's a rasha, what's an in-betweener, what's righteous, what's wicked, what's in between, the Talmud tells us there's actually 5 levels. And we'll see as we develop the Tanya why it's important. So it says like this. Now let's get to the explanation of these terms. You know how Jews, right? Why do Jews always answer a question with a question? Why not, right? So in order to answer the question we have, what is a righteous person? What's a wicked person? What's an in-betweener? We're going to quote another Gemara, which will make our head spin more. So it says, for in the Talmud, we find 5 categories. The tzaddik who has it good in this world. The tzaddik who has it bad in this world, right? This is the old saying, good people suffer, right?
That's right.
The rasha, the wicked one who has it good in this world. And rasha, the rasha, the wicked one who has it bad in this world. And the in-betweener, who is neither a tzaddik nor a rasha, meaning he's not righteous or wicked, but has elements of both. So it's basically saying here, if you're righteous, you can either be righteous in a good life, righteous in a bad life. You can either be wicked in a good life, wicked in a bad life, or you can be somebody in between. The discussion in the tractate Brachot revolves around the classic theological question. Okay, you were going to let him in? Okay. Come in. I didn't realize we'd have, I would have sat by the dining room table, but okay. You can sit over here. All right, next time I know I'll set the, see the 2 people who came last time in person, they said they're going to, yeah. What happened over here? You went at a time?
Yeah, we're online.
Exactly. Okay. So can you see that from here? Moving closer. All right. So the discussion in Tractate Brachot revolves around the classic theological question of why some righteous people suffer, the tzaddik who has it bad, while some wicked people prosper, the rasha who has it good. So again, the Talmud is really interested in the classical question, right? Why do wicked people have a good life and righteous people have a bad life? And so its basic answer is, well, some wicked people have a good life, but some wicked people have a bad life. Some good people have a good life, some good people have a bad life. Let's put that aside. But that issue is not the Tanya's concern here. That's for a JLI course. What is of interest is the Talmud's translation of these terms. All right, so let's go on to the next page over here. And after dismissing the various possible interpretations, the Talmud finally explains that the worldly fortune of or misfortune of a tzaddik is actually a reflection of his or her inner perfection. So again, one can figure out why are they having a good life, why are they having a bad life for all different reasons. But ultimately, we boil it down to this, and this is what we need to know. The tzaddik who has it good in this world enjoys a fortunate life because he or she is totally righteous. The tzaddik who has it bad in this world suffers misfortune because he or she is not totally righteous.
So is this the higher and the lower level?
Yeah. So let's pause here. So what the Talmud is saying, and again, as I mentioned last time, the Talmud was speaking. The Tanya was also speaking to a scholar. Don't get caught up too much in the question. Let's get caught up in the point. Okay, what's the point that we're saying here? The Talmud is teaching us there is a concept that even amongst righteous people, there are righteous people who are fully righteous and righteous people who are not fully righteous. So before we go further in the Tanya, how would you translate that? What do you think is a tzaddik who is fully righteous? What do you think is a righteous person who's fully righteous? And what's a righteous person who's not fully righteous?
So for a righteous person who's fully righteous is like perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas somebody who has it bad, a tzaddik who has it bad, is still learning.
So he's righteous, but in action, is he perfect in action, or what are you saying?
Oh, I'm not sure. Perfect in action? I would think perfect in all things.
Right, but the tzaddik who is not totally righteous, in what way are they not totally righteous?
Oh, I would say that could be anything. I mean, it could be in learning, it could be in actions, it could be in just integrity.
So he doesn't do everything right.
Right, correct. Still.
So at what percentage of not doing everything right does he become wicked?
Oh, that's the question, I would imagine.
Okay, you
right?
See, this is what we're going to get to. It's complicated, and we're going to present in a moment that you have the same thing that the Talmud, it says, and the same is on the opposite way. You have the wicked, there's right, so there's the wicked person who's not totally wicked, right? So when do you go from wicked person who's not totally wicked to righteous who's not totally righteous? So does it go by like 75-25? And what happens if you're 50-50, right?
I don't know. That sounds like 90% pregnant, right?
Well, so that this is the question, right? So if somebody's righteous, you would expect them to be perfect, right? That's what the word righteous means. Righteous means they're righteous. They're perfect. Larry, are we on a movie here? It's very bright. Yeah.
The righteous don't sin.
Yeah, that's the problem. When you typically say righteous, right? It typically means somebody who doesn't sin. So, what does it mean, a righteous who has them bad? So the Zohar gives a deeper explanation to what are righteous people. Now, again, by the end of today, we'll have a little bit of clarity. I know it sounds complicated right now. We'll try and make it clear. In the section of Zohar called Raya Mehem, which means faithful shepherd, on the Torah portion of Mishpatim, the term tzaddik who has it bad is further clarified as an inner state. It means that the bad within him is suppressed by the good. So interesting. According to the Zohar, the bad of a tzaddik who has it bad refers to an inner defect in his character and not merely a bad life situation or misfortune. However, the inner bad is overwhelmed and suppressed by the tzaddik's overall good. So this is already giving us a clue. What it's telling us is maybe this tzaddik who is not totally righteous actually acts perfectly. That's what we're going to develop. Maybe the tzaddik actually acts perfectly, right? However, his inner state, his inner being, is not perfect. That's what the Zohar is trying to show us, and we're going to develop that idea. Somebody mentioned in the comments, some people in Torah were considered righteous and they weren't perfect. So that's an interesting thing, because actually every righteous person that sins, the sages have to go on to explain how they didn't really sin. So we can have a discussion about that. So even King David, it says anybody who says that King David sinned is mistaken. Now we can have there's lengthy classes on that as well. But righteous people don't sin, and if they sin, it's not the way we think they sin. So just throwing it out there. Okay, now let's develop our idea more. The point that the Tanya wants to get to really is that as opposed to us, that we judge what is righteous, what is wicked based on actions, the Tanya wants to take it a step deeper. We judge righteous and wicked based on your internal state. That's what he's going to prove from these texts. What makes you righteous or wicked is your internal state. Why is that important to the Tanya? Because the Tanya deals with our internal state. That's why it's building this idea up. Okay, he continues. And in the Talmud, at the end of Tractate 9 of Brachot, it's written, in the case of tzaddikim, the impulse to do good, the Yetzer Tov, is their internal judge of what to do or not to do good. So again, he's saying, who is your ruling judge? If you are a tzaddik, is your Yetzer Tov your good inclination, which we will develop later. In the case of Rashayim, wicked people, the impulse of evil is their internal judge of what to do or not to do. So basically, righteous people, who's the ruling judge? What does it mean, a judge? We all have different voices in our mind. The judge is the one who's the final arbitrator, the one who finally decides. So righteous people, the judge, the one who they're listening to is their good inclination. Wicked people are listening to their evil inclination. And in the case of in-betweeners, both good and bad impulses are their internal judges of what to do or not to do. So again, what we're trying to lead to is this idea that there's an internal battle going on, and that's really what defines righteous and wicked. Now let's continue. This insight of the Talmud will remain for the moment unclear. The righteous are guided by their impulse to do good, and the wicked by their impulse to do evil. Seems self-evident without the Talmud. By the way, I want to caution everybody, chapter 1 is the hardest of all, and really only the first half. The second half already gets easier. The righteous are guided by their impulse to do good, and the wicked by their impulse to do evil. Seems self-evident without the Talmud's words. The in-betweeners are guided by good and bad impulses. Anybody for dairy chocolate? Are guided, sure? Okay, but that don't seem to tell us very much. The confusion over the term in-betweener is highlighted by the subsequent discussion recorded in the Talmud between the two sages. All right, so basically, let's back up a second. Now that we've moved from saying that we're judging righteous and wicked, now that we're saying we're not judging righteous and wicked just based on actions alone, but it's based on an internal state. Now there's a piece of Talmud that will make a little bit more sense. Why? Let's take a look. Amar Rabba Kagona Nabeini. Rabba said, I am an in-betweener. Now, Rabba, to give you historical context, okay, most of us that are sitting here view ourselves as in-between type of people. We do good sometimes, we do bad sometimes, right? Rabba was one of the greatest sages of the Talmud. He was a very holy person. And Rabbi says, I'm an average Joe Schmo. I'm like Rabbi Adler. I'm an in-betweener as well. You know, I'm an in-betweener as well. And how could he make such a mistake? Okay, there's something called humility, but then there's something called false humility, right? False humility is when you literally, like Moses had real humility. What does real humility mean? Moses said, God, I understand you gave me special blessings. You made me a prophet. His humility lay in the fact that he realized that if someone else would have his talents, they may have done better, even if it's not true. But that's humility. But humility would not be Moses saying, I'm a nobody because I haven't done anything in my life. That's not called humility. That's called lying. A lot of people walk around with false humility. You know, actually people that walk around with false humility are usually full of ego. You know, but they don't actually know how to do real humility. So their only way of doing humility is saying, well, I'm a nobody, I'm a nothing, right? Real humility is recognizing who you are, and yet nevertheless realizing that it's not due to necessarily your own hard work, right? So somebody who's wealthy, they can have humility, realizing, yes, I've made a couple of good decisions, but thank God, God has blessed me with the wisdom at the right times to make the right decisions, and some mazel and some luck. So this all brings us to Rabbah. Rabbah is a great rabbi. Why would Rabbah ever make the mistake that he's an in-betweener? If righteous, wicked, in-between is judged solely on actions, Rabbah was definitely farthest away from being an in-between type of person. And as Abaye answers him back, Abaye says to him back, Master, you are denying everybody life. Meaning, if you're an in-betweener, what are we, right? if you're an in-betweener, we're like the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of the barrel, right? You know, if righteous people are called in-betweeners, what does that make real in-betweeners? So obviously, as the Alter Rebbe, again, the Alter Rebbe is bringing all these texts just to point out that righteous, wicked, in-betweener has to do with an inner state. And therefore it's possible, as we see later, Rabbah could make the mistake. He may actually believe that he is fully, even if he does all the right things, he may feel because of his inner state that he's called an in-betweener, even though we'll see he's mistaken about that as well. But the point that we're trying to show is that righteous, wicked, in-betweener has to do with your inner state. And that's what the Tanya is going to spend its time talking about. It's going to talk about our inner state and what's going on, and of course, how that affects our outer state. So again, just to recap, because this was confusing. So today, we just quoted a couple of texts. We quoted a confusing Mishnah. We quoted it last week. Everybody's born, you have to promise you'll be righteous, but then you have to look at yourself as wicked, but then you shouldn't look at yourself as wicked. It's getting very confusing. And then we brought a Talmud which says there's 5 types of righteous people. And we said that righteous people have it good, meaning they have good in them. They have bad in them. How are you righteous with bad in you? We brought a Zohar which says the bad is suppressed by the good. Well, if you're righteous and the bad is suppressed by the good, then why does that make you bad? That would be good, right? Imagine imagine somebody says, well, I'm a really bad person. And you say, well, you never do anything wrong. And he says, yeah, but I always want to do the wrong thing. So you say, well, you're not bad, then you're the best person around. But no, the Zohar says if you're righteous and you have a bad urge inside of you, that makes you a righteous with bad. Why? And so we'll have to, basically, we're going to show that the definition of righteous and wicked has to do with our inner state of being. I want to point out one more thing. This is a springboard for discussion. This is a springboard for discussion. The Tanya is not obsessed with giving people titles, okay? As we say, labels are for suits. The Tanya is really obsessed with giving us a meaningful life. However, you always have to remember, possibly put this in perspective of the days when the Tanya was written. When the Tanya was written, there were probably a lot of very religious people who were walking around thinking that they were very righteous and thinking they were all good because for the most part, they did the right things. You know, they were doing the right actions. And the Alter Rebbe and the Tanya is all about working on your inside, not just getting your actions, but working on personal development. And in order to get there, oh, okay, there now you're good. And in order to get there, do I look okay now? Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, you put up your fingers, one of them goes missing.
You're fine.
Okay, and in order to get to that point, he has to sometimes shake people up. And so he has people walk in his office thinking they're righteous. And he has to tell them, not so fast. You know, let's take a look at your inner state. What's going on inside of you? Yeah, you probably get up every morning and you pray, and you probably, you study a lot. But he's trying to push people into developing themselves further. And as we will see, as the Tanya will build this out. Now, again, the Tanya is not done with driving us crazy with texts. We'll show a couple other texts. And again, like I said, will probably be the most complicated class. Let's take a look over here. So the Talmud says, just one second. Okay. Now he's going to quote from the book of Job. Anybody knows about the book of Job? Anybody knows what the book of Job is? No, book of Job.
Yes.
What is it?
The book of Job.
Yeah.
You're asking. It talked about a man who had everything and had a great life on the outside and had children, had riches and everything. And then the prosecutor was saying to God, well, it's great. Yeah, he has everything. But what would happen if you took everything away? How would he be then?
Right.
And so then they took everything away from him. All his children died, and he still had, I'm giving the short version.
Yes.
Still had faith in God and all that. And then God gave him everything back and then some.
Yes. So exactly.
Although speaking as a mother, how do you replace your children?
Right,
you can get new ones, but they're not really replacing the ones that are gone.
Yeah. Good point. Anyways, so Job at one point actually did crack when God kept, God took away his money, took away his children, and then took away his health. At that point, he cracked and he started questioning God in many different ways. And so we're going to quote one of the things that Job said. And so Job said, as you see here in the text, we also need to clarify what Job said. Master of the universe, you have created righteous people and you've created wicked people. So he was telling God, you created righteous and you created wicked people. In other words, when I was born, you decide if I'm going to be righteous, wicked. In other words, how can you punish anybody? You're making people righteous and you're making people wicked. Now that's a problematic statement because the Talmud tells us that before a child was born, the angel comes and says, ask God a couple of questions about the child, the fate of the child. And one question that's not asked is, will the child be righteous or wicked? So we have to understand, does God decide we're going to be righteous and wicked, or does God not decide we're going to be righteous and wicked? Now let's frame this question. That's the Talmudic study question. Now let's bring the question to us in our lives. Let me know, do you not think that certain people are born more righteous? Don't you think that an Abraham, a Moses, a Rabbi? I mean, we imagine that you read the stories of the very righteous people. I mean, you could just look at the Rabbi story when he was a child, but look at any righteous person. You read the stories from a child, you could tell that they were different. They acted differently. Their sensitivities were different. Their scholarship was different. the claim of Job, to me, is not just like, oh, Job said it, so we have this question. I mean, to us, doesn't it sometimes feel that way? Certain people are born with a disposition to be righteous. You know, you read the stories about them. They seem to be born righteous. And if that's the case, how does that fit with free will? Let me know what you think. Have you ever had that feeling?
But again, then we're just looking at the surface. We don't know what's going on inside of them. And then where does free will, you know, you may have predispositions for things, but ultimately, I mean, don't we have free will? And isn't that why we're here? I mean,
it's true, but I would also like to have the opportunity to become righteous. I don't know. I think when I was born, I wish I was, you know, felt as righteous as some of these other righteous people. You read their stories. Does anybody relate to what I'm saying? I mean, you read stories of righteous people. You read about Abraham at 3 years old in a world that was idolatrous. He recognized God. I mean, come on, you got to say that he was a different type of child. He wasn't just the rest of us who at 3 years old throws tantrums, you know? It just, in some ways, it kind of feels unfair, you know, especially when we talk about free will. The real righteous people, you have very few cases of real righteous people who didn't grow up righteous. Most of them are seem righteous from when they're very, very young. Even the Talmud says it. Butzin Makatvi Yadiyah. The young righteous ones have a lot of knowledge when they're young. We just want to understand, you know, do we have a chance with free will to be righteous? Okay. Yes.
Well, when you say righteous, you mean in the context of the Tanya. I mean, that's
Well,
extraordinarily
depends.
difficult.
Well, yes, to be righteous, let's say just in the context of
Just sort of
righteous people that we know.
Well, yeah, I mean, you always have the opportunity to, you know, to repent, to develop, to do more.
Yeah, but it kind of feels that the really righteous people have it rigged for them. I feel like it's rigged. No,
Well,
it's like politics, you know.
So who is righteous? Who's righteous that we know? Who's righteous?
Well, but that could be true for
Who's
like,
righteous? The Rabbi was righteous, right?
Besides the Rabbi, right? There's not many.
There were many, I mean, today, but there were many others. And you read history, read all the Rabbis of all the different sects. Very righteous people. You read their stories.
Well, with anything, some people start with more advantages than others, but that doesn't mean you can't attain a certain level of whatever, you know, whether we're talking about money or.
I hear what you're saying.
I mean,
but it just feels like,
well, for us, I mean, the reality for us is that the attainment of the Beinoni would be an extraordinarily
right. Well, let's get to that too. Well, let's also question, does anybody here have an aspiration to become righteous like the Rebbe? No, nobody's aspiring to that yet. Okay. So it's that question's not going to bother you too much. So then we'll get to what is an in-betweener. That's probably bothering you more because we're all in-betweeners. We want to know what the heck is that. So that's what the Tanya goes into now. Again, my one thought you can say is the reason why he spent so much time talking about the righteous is because, again, there were so many people during his age who thought of themselves as righteous. And the Alter Rebbe had to tell them, hold on for a second. Once I explain to you what righteous really is, don't think so highly about yourself. But most of us today, I don't think we're caught thinking that, although we do think we're good people, but not righteous necessarily.
Well, that's not entirely true.
What?
Just very quickly.
Yeah.
In Muncie, New York, there was a trafe chicken was being sold by a kosher butcher.
Yeah.
And the people who ate it got physically ill from it because they felt like, you know, they would know
right
if they were eating trafe or if they were eating kosher, and obviously they didn't. You know, so they had a view that they were more righteous
than they
actually were.
You're right. Okay, I should clarify. There are still many people around today who think they're righteous. I don't know how many people here in this class think that. All right, so just to clarify, correct. Okay.
We're a little bit more self-aware than,
Yeah.
you know.
Or as the Tanya says earlier, we like to look at ourselves as wicked, so we can like feel like, oh, no big deal if I do worse things. Anyways, either way you want to look at it. So
I would think that most of the people here think that they're a work in progress. I mean, I don't want to speak for anybody else, I guess, but
yeah. So
and that want
we're
to
probably
elevate,
all,
so that's why we're here.
yeah. So most of us would probably think we're more at the Beinoni, the middle intermediates. Let's talk about that. So now he says, now that we're totally confused about what a tzaddik is, and hopefully you all are confused, because it seems like that's what the Alter Rebbe's intention was, confuse you about what a tzaddik is so that you have no idea what it is anymore. Now he'll confuse you about what is an intermediate person. Again, chapter 1 is the hardest, and really it's the first half. So bear with us this week. We also need to understand a real understanding of the in-betweener status, for it's definitely can't be understood as a person whose portion of merits to transgressions is equal, right? So imagine we would say an in-between person is somebody who's 50-50. Why can't we say that? Because if that were the case, how could Rabbi have mistaken himself for a Beinoni when such a degree of error could not be attributed to humility, right? That's what I explained earlier. I explained an in-between type of person. When the Talmud says there's righteous, there's wicked in between. In between cannot be somebody who has 50-50 good deeds. First of all, it's a ridiculous status to try and attain. I mean, you're going to sit around all day. All right, I got 51 good deeds, 49 bad deeds. Time to do another bad. Time to do another bad deed to even it out. This would be kind of a silly type of thing. But even more so, Rabba would never make a mistake that he's an in-between type of person if the meaning of in-between was 50-50 good and bad deeds, because he didn't do bad deeds. And we're going to prove the point. For Rabba famously did not allow his mouth to stop studying to the extent that even the angel of death could not overpower him, since he was occupied with the mitzvah constantly. So the Talmud tells us that the angel of death cannot get us while we are involved in a mitzvah. So Rabba would constantly study Torah, and to the point that when it was his time to die, the angel of death had to distract him momentarily, so he would stop studying Torah for a moment, and then he could take his life. But that proves to the point that he was always studying Torah, always reading words of Torah. And if so, how could he have wrongly assessed himself to have transgressions in equal portion to his mitzvahs, God forbid? If he was a guy that was studying Torah all day by heart, no matter what he was doing, how could he possibly even think that he was wicked? Okay. Having ruled out this simple understanding of in-betweener, we now question if the very notion of intermediate status is possible. Also, as we shall soon see, at the moment when a person transgressed, he is classified by the sages as total rasha, and if he subsequently repents, he is classified as a total tzaddik. So at what point could he be in between? So this is an interesting point. Based on certain texts, it seems like when you sin, immediately you're wicked. So let's say somebody was righteous his entire life, and then he eats pork. So let's say you have a tzaddik. I'm not going to give any names because it's hypothetical. Let's say somebody's a tzaddik, full tzaddik, full righteous person, and he eats a piece of pork. Is he still a tzaddik? Is he still a righteous person?
Oh.
But he only did one bad deed.
That's it.
That's it. He's gone. Right now, he did one bad deed. You can't call him a tzaddik anymore. But then, let's say a moment later, he repents for his bad deeds. God forgives him. Now he should be again righteous. So seemingly in life, we should only be able to bounce in between good and bad, in between righteous and wicked. How do you end up in in-between status? How would you ever get there?
When everything you do on the outside is good, but you still have the inner conflict on the inside.
Exactly. That's gonna have to be the answer. That's his point. He's trying to point out, if it's solely based on actions, all the labels and classifications don't begin to make sense. And he continues, he says, and if you want to say maybe an in-between person is somebody who does all the biblical commandments but only sins rabbinically, that's also considered wicked. As he says, even a person who violates a minor rabbinic precept is considered a rasha, a wicked person. And now he brings a proof. As stated in the Talmud chapter 2 of the Tractate Yevamos and the first chapter of the Tractate Nida, right? So the Talmud tells us if somebody does a something that's forbidden rabbinically, he automatically becomes wicked. And then he takes it even further. And we're now on page 32. And a person is termed a rasha, wicked, even if he had the opportunity to reprimand someone else but failed to do so. So again, if let's say you see somebody sinning, you have the opportunity to stop them from sinning, and you didn't, you are now wicked as well. So I want to qualify that. That doesn't mean that Larry should go over to everybody he sees doing the wrong things and telling them off. There are rules in the Torah of when you can and can't tell people off. But assuming you were in the right instance where you could have told somebody off and you didn't, you are considered wicked. And then he continues. And then all the more so with someone who A, actively neglects, or B, a biblical command that he would have observed would definitely be classified as a rasha. So in other words, even if you're, let's say, didn't do anything negative, but you neglected a positive, right? So in Judaism, there's negative commandments like eating pork. There's also neglecting a positive, let's say, not putting on tefillin, not lighting a menorah. But here he gives an example, such as to cite a common example, any person who had the opportunity to study Torah, but failed to do so, to whom the sages applied the verse, he has expressed contempt for the word of God, that soul will be cut off. Obviously, this person who failed to observe the biblical commandments deserves the title rasha, wicked, more than one who violates a rabbinic prohibition. So what he's saying here is that even if you fail to study Torah, which is very difficult to study Torah all the time, right? There's a mitzvah. If you have any extra time in your day, you should study Torah. If you had time to study Torah and you didn't, you're considered wicked. Anybody here getting depressed? How easy it is to become wicked? I mean, think about it. It's so easy to become wicked. I didn't tell somebody off. I did a rabbinic misnomer. I did a rabbinic violation. I didn't study Torah for 5 seconds. Now I'm wicked. Sounds depressing. Does sound depressing. That's why I say the Tanya is not about the labels. Tanya is not about the labels. If it was about the labels, you actually may be depressed once the Talmud gives you its final ruling and what you are. And that's why I'm cautioning. The Tanya, as he says in the beginning, he's not here to clarify some scholarly debate about what is righteous, what is wicked. He's here to help you in your service of God, and it starts from the inside. And all he's trying to do in this beginning of the chapter is to prove to you that based on all of the labels, we have to say that the labels are based on an internal state. And the reason why he's saying that is because therefore we have to look at our internal state and how do we deal with it. And so this is how he ends. Therefore, you are forced to conclude that the in-betweener is not even guilty of a common transgression of neglecting to study Torah for a single moment. These proofs lead us to the conclusion that a person who transgresses Jewish law in any way must be deemed a rasha, wicked. For the onlooker, then the tzaddik and the beinoni are indistinguishable. Neither are guilty of any transgression whatsoever, biblical or rabbinic. The distinction between them must be internal one, right? So again, if you sin, you're wicked. So obviously the in-between person and the righteous person both do not sin. So then the question is, well, what differentiates between the two, between a righteous and an in-between person? It has to be their internal state. Based on all of this, where does this place all of us? You're all smart people. Where does this place all of us so far? If you do a sin, you're automatically deemed wicked. Rasha, what are we all?
Rasha.
We're all Rasha. We're all wicked, right? Yeah, we are wicked. That is kind of the story. And as much as maybe we repent, I suspect we sin pretty soon after that as well. At the very least, we don't study some Torah, right? So, that was the last page I took a picture of. So the point being, and I'm going to repeat this because one last time over here until I repeat it again, that the point that we're trying to get to, I said this in my introduction, and I'm sorry, chapter 1 is so heavy, but we have to deal with our inner state. You can imagine, why is this such an important point? You can imagine if somebody reads the Torah, you won't really see in there a lengthy discussion about your inner state. It discusses things you should do and things you shouldn't do. And therefore, many people get caught up in the checklist of Judaism and all the things that they should do and shouldn't do. And they forget about serving God. And serving God implies an internal state as well. As he proved it from the fact that the Torah tells us we have to love God and fear God. this is why the Alter Rebbe spends so much time on these texts. Because again, we don't want you to think Judaism is just about the do's and the don'ts. There's an internal state that we have to deal with and is very important in our divine service of God. And ultimately, when we deal with our inner state, the outer actions are going to be an extension of our inner state, and honestly will make it easier. So just from a practical standpoint, if you deal with your inner state, your actions will follow along with your inner state, along with your inner peace, along with whatever is going on inside of you. At least that's the hope. It's a long path, but it's a longer, shorter path. Any questions or comments? Nope. All right, I know it's confusing.
Well, it seems like what it's talking about, just in general, is like
Yeah,
you, for lack of a better analogy, you attract, or you bring into your life what you are. Like when you were talking about earlier, how the different levels of being a Rasha or a Tzaddik, how, you know, somebody could be living a good life and be a Rasha or any of that everything starts with the internal state, your actions, everything, or what even is in your outside experience, I would think.
yeah. Yeah, and again, you can frame where this is coming from in so many different directions. Some people will come to dealing with the inner state. They might have grown up religious all their life and been told to do certain things, and they may be coming to the Alter Rebbe. Again, this is all based on his advice. They may be coming to him and saying, look, I've been trying to live a religious life for so long, and I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. And the Alter Rebbe might turn to them and say, well, that's because maybe you've just been dealing with your actions. You've only been looking at what you should do and you shouldn't do, and trying to force yourself to do something without working on your internal state may not work. And so that's what the Alter Rebbe turns to these people and say, you want to become better? Let's go have a discussion about what's going on inside of you. Let's have a discussion about your internal spiritual state, not just the actions that you are doing and aren't doing. That's another way to approach it. And that's sometimes the way we need to approach it. We may be, you know, we have in our mind intellectually things that we want to do, but we don't find ourselves inspired enough. And Alter Rebbe comes to us and says, well, you're not inspired enough. That's because you're just saying, I need to do this and I don't need to do that, right? Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's the way you grew up. Maybe intellectually you understand it's the right thing. But as long as we're not going to work on our internal state, and that includes our emotions, there could be a disconnect. And that's why we're not moving the ball. It's not moving anywhere. It's not going anywhere. We're stuck in our spiritual and divine service. Okay. So let us take a look back in the text. So he ends off, that's why Rabbi was able to make himself a mistake, that he was a Beinoni, again, because as we said a moment ago, that the difference between a Beinoni in between and a Tzaddik, righteous person, is not an action, it's an internal state. Now, he does want to point out something. He wants to put something to rest. He says, we do live with a concept in general that somebody who does more good deeds than bad is considered righteous. Someone who does more bad deeds than good is considered wicked. And he says that is true to a certain extent in certain context, right? Everything is within context. So for example, we know that when people go to heaven, right? We talk about, you ever hear about the stories of people going to heaven? You hear the Jewish stories. They go to heaven and there was the scales and it was weighing, or we talk about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, right? Are we going to be deemed righteous or wicked? We talk about the scales. Well, if one bad deed makes us wicked, what are the scales doing? And so the Alter Rebbe comes in here and says, within the framework of punishment and reward, we do define righteous and wicked based on percentages. Okay? Again, within the framework of punishment and reward, whether it's referring to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, whether it refers to after we pass away, there we will employ righteous based on, are you better? Wicked, are you worse in general? But that's not for our day-to-day context. So let's read further. He says, and as for the common reference of the rabbinic text, to the Beinoni as one with an equal proportion of transgressions to merits, and to the tzaddik as one with a majority of merits, which directly contradicts what we have demonstrated so far, that a Beinoni does not transgress at all. So he's going to say, this represents a figurative, imprecise use of the terms tzaddik, which is righteous, and Beinoni, intermediate, for the purpose of illustrating an entirely different discussion, the method by which God rewards and punishes. This is because a person is judged by God according to the majority of his transgressions or merits. He is classified as righteous not as a person, but in his verdict when he is acquitted in judgment by God, right? So the way you, like when you go to court and they say, this person is good, this person is bad, it doesn't mean that that's who they are. This means within the context of reward and punishment, they're good or bad. He's saying the same thing as over here. Yes, when you go to heaven, if you have more good deeds than bad deeds, they might call you a tzaddik, righteous. But that's in the context of reward and punishment, in context of verdict. But it's not the general context that is used about how we define what makes somebody a tzaddik, what makes somebody righteous, what makes somebody wicked. And as he says here, let's read the commentary. The use of the term tzaddik, righteous, and Beinoni, intermediate, in the context of divine reward and punishment is imprecise and irrelevant to our discussion of the real meaning of these terms as measures of character. There is a major difference that Tanya suggests between being righteous in verdict and a righteous person. When discussing whether a person will receive a divine allotted reward, the sages will sometimes appropriate the term tzaddik to describe the outcome of the heavenly verdict. One is righteous in verdict for reward must have a majority of merits. The Beinoni in verdict will have an equal ratio of merits to transgressions. Somebody asked how the human eye can tell if a person is righteous or this person is not righteous. You can't. You can try. You can't really tell if somebody would be an intermediate or a tzaddik or righteous because their actions look the same. Only God knows. I won't bring up that point later in the Tanya. Okay. So let's continue along this point, demonstrating there's two ways of using the terms. However, as the Tanya is demonstrated, when the terms are used precisely as descriptions of character, neither tzaddik nor Beinoni are guilty of any transgression at all. So if neither the tzaddik, the righteous, nor the Beinoni, the intermediate, transgress, what distinguishes them, the Tanya returns to the only real definition that we have, the one from Tractate Brachot cited above. When speaking of the true inner definitive quality that distinguishes the character of righteous from the intermediate, the sage is taught, in the case of righteous, their impulse to good is their internal judge. We encountered this teaching above, and its precise meaning remained unclear. The Tanya will now cite the next line of Talmud, which will enable us to define the tzaddik and Beinoni categorically. So now we're going to describe, if righteous and intermediate both don't do bad deeds, what is the difference between them? And our answer is how active the evil inclination is. The Talmud continues, as King David states in his verse, my heart is empty within me. An empty heart means that a tzaddik is devoid of an impulse to evil. Anybody here is devoid of an impulse to evil? Anybody here devoid of an impulse to evil? No? Nobody's devoid of an impulse to evil. So I think that means that none of us are tzaddikim righteous. Okay. We've settled that score for today so far. In the case of a tzaddik, a righteous person, their impulse to good as their internal judge means that it is their only and exclusive internal judge. The impulse to evil has been emptied and voided of tzaddikim completely, and this is the true definitive quality of their status. So that's pretty crazy to think that a righteous person has no desire for evil. That's why, then you might ask, well, what about free choice? What about how do they serve God? If they don't have any impulse to do wrong, by the way, we're going to be done in 3 minutes. If they don't have an impulse to do wrong, what do they spend their life doing? What is their life's mission?
Well, what is evil? I mean, killing somebody, or is it,
right? So evil, we're gonna
eating bacon. What's evil?
Good question. We're gonna define it, I believe, in chapter 2 or 3. I have to look it up again. We're gonna define evil. We're gonna define it actually at length. Let's see. Evil is gonna be defined in chapter 6 and 7 and 8. But to give you the short version, evil is anything that is not godly. God is good. Anything that's not good is evil. In this context over here, okay? So evil even means not studying Torah. It's disconnection from God, okay? Sounds extreme. We will explain in those chapters why it's so extreme. Basically, the point is that in life, either you're doing something good or you're not doing something good. That's really the point. You have two choices in life. Now, working can also be good if it's done for the right purpose and right reasons. But the basic point that Tanya is going to make later is in life, there's no middle ground. There are items that can go either way, but your actions, your feelings in those actions can only be good, in other words, godly or not godly. It's like someone else said it earlier, either you're pregnant or you're not pregnant. Either what you're doing is godly or it's not godly. And if it's not godly, it's disconnected from God, then it's death, it's evil, as we'll get to in the later chapters. So you might ask, if a righteous person has no evil inclination, what do they spend their life doing? The answer is that a righteous person will not be reading this book. This book is called the Book for In-Betweeners. This is not their mission and purpose. They will not find meaning in here. In fact, the Alter Rabbi wrote another book called the Book for Righteous People, the Sefer Shel Tzadikim. You might ask, how do I find that book? The answer is he wrote it. He never published it. He showed it to another colleague of his who was a tzaddik, a righteous person. And that righteous person said, this book is not for the world. It's not meant to be printed, you know. This type of life is not for everybody. And, I guess if you're a tzaddik, you know what you're supposed to do. I'm not exactly sure, but, the book is not supposed to be out there. And when that tzaddik, when that righteous person died, that book, there was a fire and that book burnt up at the same time that the Alter Rebbe had written. The point that we get from the story is that righteous people have a different meaning in life and different purpose than just fighting their darker side that we have, as we'll get to. And so we're not going to spend time discussing it because everybody here is not relevant for you. And if you were that righteous level, you would probably already know what you're supposed to be doing. So we're not going to get into what righteous people do or what their life's mission is, I should say, meaning and purpose. Okay, the Tanya points out, how do you get rid of your evil inclination? He says, King David annihilated it through fasting, which is why it's never going to work for you. If you abhor fasting, it's not going to get you very far.
That was one method.
That was one
I'm
method.
sure
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
others.
Obviously, he did many more things.
Yeah.
Not if you show up with latkes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. The fasting's not going to work. This level where the impulse to evil has been annihilated represents the true distinction between tzaddik, righteous, and Beinoni intermediate. While neither of them actually transgress, the Beinoni retains the impulse to do so, whereas the tzaddik has annihilated the urge completely. But he continues, but anyone who has not yet reached this level of annihilating the impulse to evil, even if his merits outweigh his transgressions, which means that figuratively speaking, he... the last page I took a picture of? Meaning figuratively speaking, we're now on page 36. Yeah, I was trying to get through all the tough pages today, because next week already we'll start discussing we'll move on from labels. So let's see over here. He says, I didn't upload yet, just give me a moment. Oh, we're running out of time. Let's see here. Okay, it should be up. A moment. Okay, so he says over here. So again, we were saying that anyone who has not yet reached this level, even if his merit outweighs his transgressions, in reality, as long as he's not annihilated his impulse to evil, he's not at the level of a tzaddik at all. And let's continue. That's why our sages taught in the Medrash, the Holy One, blessed be, saw that tzaddikim were few, so he carefully placed them in each generation. We also find the higher level of tzaddik whose righteousness is unparalleled by any other in a generation, as the verse states, that tzaddik is foundation of the world. Point is, there's very few righteous people. Why are there very few righteous people? If righteous just meant people who are more good than bad, there would be a lot of righteous people, right? But now that we understand the definition of righteous is an internal state where you've gotten rid of your evil inclination and you don't do anything wrong ever, well, that's going to be very few people. Okay. So when somebody asks, well, why does Chabad not have, another Rebbe? Well, first I asked him, find me a tzaddik who can even be, the next Rebbe. Rebbes are supposed to be tzaddikim, really righteous people. They're not just leaders of a movement. It's a whole different type of person. Moses was not just a talented person. He was somebody who lived a different life. At some point, he had gotten rid of his evil inclination. You may still ask, how did they sin? That's a discussion we can have another time. But here we have it. Righteous people are rare. We are not this definition of righteous. we do have an inner battle. We do have an evil inclination. And at best, we're maybe a Beinoni, this intermediate guy who somehow still has impulses for evil, but doesn't ever actually act upon it. And that's what we're going to discuss. And so all of this is really just to bring us into what we're going to start next week, which is the doctrine of the two souls, discussing how we have two souls and how there's a battle going on inside of us. Because again, all we've been trying to bring home today is life is about that internal battle. And once we defined, it's not just about the actions, okay? Once we define what really defines people is their internal battle, well, now we need to spend the next bunch of chapters discussing and defining that internal battle. And so that's going to be for next week. We're going to discuss the internal battle. So what is a takeaway that we can take away from today? Number one is Talmudic texts, and all those can be very confusing, okay? And again, if you didn't follow all the discussion back and forth, that's not important. The important thing is that Judaism is not just about the do's and the don'ts. Did I do it and did I not? Not to say they're not important, but the point is that serving God means going beyond just did I do it, did I not do it? And that's what the Tanya is going to do for us. And if you've been maybe depressed about not being able to go further in your divine service of God, know that hopefully through the Tanya you will be able to progress further, because once we discover the inner workings, we're not just trying to force ourselves to do actions because we know they're right, but we will hopefully build within ourselves the feelings towards doing what is right. Okay, that's my spiel for today. No, it's complicated. God willing, the next week's will be a little more simple. I'm going to stop the recording. Anybody